on Facebook. I see you every once in a while. You have one up.
Every once in a while, I think I want to sell one, but I don't really try very hard. So
This is so weird. I have two screens on my computer in my office. So when someone speaks, the big screen shows up on the other computer. It's weird.
wait, you mean I could do this on my office computer?
That's what I'm doing it on.
Me too.
You can if you want.
So I could see everybody now, all the boxes. I see everybody.
Okay, so it says that we're live on YouTube now.
Okay. All right. Everyone, welcome to the budget meeting of the Oakland Mayor and Council. It's April 16th, 2020, 10 o'clock a.m. in the morning. This meeting is being conducted via Zoom. Roll call.
Mayor Schwager,
Here.
Councilman Bialy,
Here.
Councilman Knapp,
Here.
Councilman Levy,
Here.
Councilman Pignatelli,
Here.
Councilman Talamini,
Here.
Councilman Van Eck.
Here.
The salute to the flag, you all can do it on your own, in your own location. At this time, just please, a moment of silence for all those who are impacted by the virus, family, friends, everyone stay safe, our residents. Thank you. Now we're all in different locations, and so we're working together. This meeting announcement. This meeting is being held in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Law and pursuant to the New Jersey state guidelines during this public health crisis, duly announced, advertised, and posted in the municipal building. We now have a general discussion of the 2020 budget. This meeting is solely for the purpose to talk about the 2020 Oakland budget, and leading the discussion will be our CFO, David Young. Thank you, David, for doing this.
You're welcome, Mayor. I'm going to share a presentation. Everybody should have received an update this morning. Nothing changed in terms of the 2020, but we did have to make some changes on the 2019 side. All right, so this is the agenda for the budget portion of the meeting that we're going to go through. I'm going to talk about budget appropriations first. You should have gotten a 2020 budget PDF that's got all the detail. Then we'll talk about the capital plan. You'll also receive a capital PDF. We'll then get into revenue and tax impact. That closes out the current fund. And then after that, we'll discuss the water and sewer utilities. Just as a reminder for folks in terms of our overall budget process, we start this in September. Budget packages are sent out to department heads and commission chairs. They work through their budgets for the next year. They'll submit those to the CFO and myself. We'll do budget review meetings in November and December. December and January, we're reviewing with the Finance Committee proposed budgets. Then we recycle back to any department heads or commissions where we have to address any concerns, and brings us to the March-April meeting with the governing body to review the proposed budget. This we do prior to intro, which is scheduled for our next council meeting. April-May, we'll introduce and adopt, and May-June, we will do the capital plan.
Right, and maybe before we go on for that, I just want everybody to understand that there were certainly some challenges that have been presented due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We were ready, probably three weeks ago at least, to have the meeting that we're having today, and we were forced to kind of go back to the drawing board due to some issues with what we perceived to be with revenue. So we took some time to take a fresh look at things. Subsequently met with the Finance Committee again. And now we're ready to present it to you for your input prior to introduction next week. The state did modify the statutory deadlines for introduction and approval. So if we introduce next week and adopt in late May, we are still within the statutory provision set forth by the state.
Hey, just a heads up, I'm gonna probably drop off for a second and then drop back up. So you can continue, but if you might get an interruption from me.
All right, thanks, Bob.
David, go ahead.
All right, thanks, Rich. So first, we're going to start with the budget appropriations. These are the considerations that went into the budget process. We look at all spending and no spend decisions. We look at their impact to the current year as well as the next 4 budget cycles. Because depending upon what kind of expenses we're working with, we've got contracts that run year to year. We've got labor agreements that give us salary information. So we have a pretty good ability to project a budget into the next 4 or 5 years. Everything we choose to spend this year or not spend has an impact moving forward as well. We do establish appropriations for all contractual and statutory expenditures. We have things like the solid waste disposal contract or the county health contract that we know what they are and what they're going to be, so we can load those in pretty firmly. We identify the proposed capital expenditures. For this year, as Rich said, we did reevaluate the budget based upon the coronavirus. We looked at items that we could reduce based upon closure of facilities. We do have some opportunity in both senior and library. With those facilities closed, there are some programs that aren't happening. Not so much on the rec side, because of the way the rec program works. A lot of their expenses for spring sports were already made prior to, having to stop those programs temporarily from happening. We also looked at incremental costs associated with coronavirus. Something like the fact that we're going to now be sending out estimated tax bills. So we had to increase that budget accordingly. We also had department heads go back and look at any planned new hires or replacements, any capital expenditures that could be cut, because we do know that there's a need to be very, very frugal with this budget in as many places as possible. And of course, as always, we comply with the appropriation cap requirements. As far as the budget itself for 2020, this is how the budget is being spent. About 38% of the budget is on salary and wages. This is contractual. We have agreements with our collective bargaining units, so we know what the impact is going to be. Not a lot of flexibility there. The flexibility we do have is whether we hire or don't hire replacements as we get through retirements and things like that. Pension and health benefits, this is also fairly fixed. We know what those costs are going into the year. Pension is a 2-year lag on the people that we had hired. Health benefits, we get that information based upon the estimates from the JIF at the beginning of each year. We have 15% or so about on fixed operating or other expenses. These are contracts like solid waste or services that we have to have for our attorney and our engineer and things like that, which are fixed and contracted at the beginning of each year. The RUT's about 2.25%. That's our reserve for uncollected taxes. We do have some variable other expenses. These are non-contractual, but inside that is things like utilities, ammunition for the police, repair parts for public works. And then the last piece of the puzzle is capital and debt. The debt side's fairly fixed. Capital side is where we have opportunity plus or minus.
David,
Yes.
is 2.4% for uncollected taxes a good number
It is.
compared to other in general?
It is because we do the accelerated tax sale. Our RUT's fairly stable element for us. We know what it is year over year. It hasn't moved much. What moves it up a little bit each year as the budget gets larger or the tax revenue gets larger, we have to collect a little bit more. But it's fairly stable. When we look at that, we've got some safety net in there. If we have an opportunity with the amount of taxes being collected this year versus past years, I think we'll be okay. The auditors looked at that and didn't recommend any changes.
Yeah. And so everybody understands too, the overall amount that we fund in the reserve for uncollected taxes is actually considerably less than in towns that don't do an accelerated tax sale. Because we do that, we're kind of guaranteed to get in most of our money. So the RUT is correspondingly smaller. And a matter of fact, issues with the RUT that occurred and the statutory calculation for that during the Great Recession is what led us to do the accelerated tax sale in the first place. Everybody should understand as well with the reserve for uncollected taxes, it has to be calculated at an amount on the entire tax levy because we're the collection agent for the schools and county as well. So that's not just meant to cover property taxes that we use, but also that we have to distribute to the schools and to the county as well.
Thanks,
Okay.
Rich. And anything else on this one?
No.
Okay. Again, still on the appropriation side, these are the key drivers. If you look at the chart at the bottom, our overall budget is going up by $342,000. That's about a 1.7% increase year over year. The salary and wages is actually going down. This is a result of a lot of the retirements that we had last year. Generally, retirees retire at the top end of the salary scale, and people coming in to replace them come in at the other end. The other side of retirements is the fact that our insurance is up by $155,000. When we have a retirement, we actually net increase the number of people in our program because the retiree, depending upon which band they're in, is going to be in our insurance pool as well. IT is up about $60,000 year over year, as is code enforcement. Solid waste is also up by around $90,000. In terms of inside the cap, those are the four key drivers that are moving the budget up this year.
David,
Yes,
I'm sorry to interrupt. You said insurance is up 150,000?
yes.
What insurance is that?
That's our health benefits.
Okay.
All right, so let me dig into that a little bit with you guys. The rate change this year was actually quite modest. There was some variability. Medical was up 3, prescription was down 4, and the like. The overall net change to our premium rates was about 1%, which is actually very low. So what you're seeing with most of that, as David alluded to, was really an increase in the total census of those that are covered due to the virtue that we had a lot of retirements last year. Now, you're going to see when we get a little bit further into this with the salaries that we're kind of seeing a benefit of that this year. But on the insurance side, it actually causes the insurance budget to kick up because you're covering more lives. And when you're covering retirees, the cost is actually higher until they turn 65 because they get put into a different rating pool. So that, coupled with some people coming off of, let's say, the health insurance waiver program because they aged out of being able to be covered on their parents' policies and whatnot. When we put all of that together, it was about a 7.8% increase this year.
Why is IT up 60,000?
So IT this year,
That's Vinny's fault.
Actually, Vinny's very frugal, but we have several things there that make that up. Some of them have to do with security, security assessment, penetration testing, development of a security plan, and other things like multi-factor authentication. We want to roll that out. There's a cost to that. We signed up last year for a program called Archive Social. That is basically to archive all of our social media posts. That's something that's kind of required based on recent court actions. And also an expansion of some of our productivity software like SDL, where we're now buying the property maintenance module and increasing the number of users. So some of this is going to be ongoing. We're hoping next year to be able to dial that back. We're looking at making some changes for our internet connectivity with the fiber ring and changing providers. So hopefully that'll be able to be reduced somewhat next year.
Rich or David, I see capital is up $240,000. Will we get a breakout of where we're spending that money?
Absolutely. That capital will be up next, and we'll give you a detail of where it is.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And Richard, and that IT summation you gave,
Yes.
a lot of that was due to the 2018 impact of the intrusion we had. Am I correct?
There's part of that. Certainly, there's been more of a focus on security and being, doing things like actively doing penetration testing and the security assessment and things like that to a greater extent than we used to. We'd also changed providers last year, for our IT support. There's a bit of a cost increase here for that as well. So yes, as we become a little bit more adept at this stuff, as much as we like to think that technology saves you money, there's expenses related to it as well that have to be borne. If I can just quickly go through the couple of other items there that we have on the inside cap side. Code enforcement is up, as you see there, $55,000. Primarily that is due to hiring an additional person and the full phase in of the new, still relatively new shared service agreement with Franklin Lakes. So, that was an area that we were focusing on last year and into this year to increase the level of services in that department. And we took advantage of some retirements last year to start doing that. So there's actually additional time budgeted for fire inspectors and additional administrative support as well. So that's what's kind of making up that number. Solid waste is up by the $90,000 on the OE side. And that is, there are certain contractual increases there for the solid waste hauler that was, programmed in when we awarded that bid 3 years ago. But the bulk of that actually is for an increase in the disposal line item that's really caused by the current state of the recycling markets. Right now, we're paying about, give or take $35 a ton to dispose of, to send the commingled and paper recyclables to our marketer. That's a vast change from where, the industry was 3-4 years ago, where we were making revenue on that. So, last year we covered some of that with some recycling tonnage grant money. That's really not going to be possible this year. So we had to increase that line item to cover the projected cost there. Okay.
Rich,
Thanks, Rich.
quick question. While we're talking about the recycling and the garbage pickup, what's the difference between our solid waste pickup and our recycling pickup cost per ton?
On the collection side, it's really not broken out on a cost per ton.
On the tipping side.
Right. So on the tipping side, we're paying $68, $69 a ton to dispose of garbage. And as I just said, $30 to $35 a ton or so right now to dispose of the recyclables.
So it still pays to recycle.
Yeah. I mean, when you say it pays to recycle, yes, it's still cheaper to get rid of the recyclables. I don't want anybody thinking that, we're making money on the recycling program. We're not. But yes, it's still more cost effective to send those materials to a marketer rather than to a dump. Yes.
Rich, when we first started recycling, we did get revenue for recycling material. And that has changed over the course of years.
Oh yeah. The market's changed pretty considerably over the last 10 years. There was a move maybe 7-8 years ago to go to single stream. That was going to drive increases in tonnage, and it did for a little while. Then over the last 3-4 years, the bottom fell out of the recycling market, and single stream no longer made sense. So, of course, we went back to the dual stream. Single stream tipping fees right now. So if we were still single stream and sending that material to our marketer, we would be getting charged about $80 a ton.
Wow.
So it's actually much more cost effective to be doing it dual stream the way we're doing it now.
Very good.
Okay. David, I think you can continue.
I guess next.
Okay, just before we get off this slide, we did talk about the outside of cap stuff. Capital is up. We're going to get to that in a second. A library is up 50,000. That's due to their third of a mil being higher. On the other side of that, they've taken down the supplemental by almost half.
Could you explain that since the public is listening? I don't think they understand the requirement of a third of a mil.
Certainly. So this by statute, the library gets $1/3 for every percentage of the assessed value of all the properties within the municipality. That's statutory. As the assessed value goes up, so does their tax levy. As it goes down, their tax levy goes down. The
And that's a
borough,
required amount.
that is required. The borough has been providing a supplemental amount to the library to help with their programs and offsets. At one point, that was up at $45,000. It came in at $30,000 this year with Peter's budget. And with the COVID closing some programs, that's now down to around $25,000 in supplemental.
Thank you.
Grants are also down. The other side of grants is a revenue offset, so that doesn't affect the tax levy at all. But we had a couple of one-off grants last year. We partnered with a first aid squad to purchase a vehicle for over $100,000 in terms of their grant, and as well as a $100,000 plus grant for the senior center generator. And then I don't remember if we talked about this, but overall salary and wages are down by 42%, or 42,000. On the capital side, we do again evaluate the impact of this year's budget and the next 4 budget cycles. There are ongoing infrastructure maintenance requirements that we have inside of our budget that if we don't do this year, they'll have an effect downstream, as those requirements would be increased going forward. We have ongoing replacement schedules that we try to meet. We look to prioritize critical needs, and we do have to comply with the debt service limitations as a % of assessed value. The state does not allow us to get more than 3% of our assessed value in terms of debt service. We are currently at around 1%, which is roughly where most municipalities are sitting at this time. So here is the 2020 capital plan. Just to quickly go through the color coding, you can see it's separated by department. Those items
All
highlighted
right,
in
David,
green.
David,
Yes.
stop a minute. Because we have public listening, could you explain the difference with our budget and the capital? What is
Yeah, so
capital?
the capital has 2 elements to it. It has a direct budget element, which we fund for things like outright purchases, part of our capital improvement plan, and for down payments. So a portion of the capital plan impacts the current year budget. The majority of it does not impact the current year budget. That's the total cost of something where we're going to go out in debt and pay for something over a longer period of time.
Okay, thank you.
If you look at our budget this year, our capital plan has about $6.5 million in it. The impact to the current year budget is $1.1 million. The items highlighted in green, those are part of what we consider our ongoing infrastructure maintenance programs. Those are things that, we fund on a regular basis. They're part of every year. If we don't fund them in a given calendar year, they would put increased impact to future year budgets, because those are things that do need to get done at one point or another. The ones in yellow are ones that probably have a risk associated with not doing them. Patriots Way Bridge, pretty big, significant chunk of our budget. If we don't replace the bridge, there are safety risks to not doing that and delaying that. The front loader replacement, again, could you delay? Possibly, but then you start incurring potential rental and repair costs on the other side of that. And then the white ones are ones that, things that we've been putting in the budget, the department heads or commissions have, validated those needs over a year or 2 in the budget process. And this is when they've kind of fit into the funding piece of it.
I have a couple of comments about capital expenditures, but if someone else wants to go first, that's okay with me.
The computer system upgrades.
Yes, Mayor, that's a upgrade project that we have planned for the main borough network to add memory and processing speed to it.
If no one else has any questions, I have a couple of questions. on the capital expenditure. In terms of the entire budget, I know every year we sit down with department heads and, we go through their budget and they explain all the expenditures. And they've always been very good with that. And I know Richard and David meets with them and tries to save whatever they can save and bring those O&E expenditures down. So I don't want to leave departments without the sufficient funds for O&E. However, I look at capital expenditures and I see some of them can be delayed and some of them can't. Obviously, the Patriots Way Bridge is, a super important item. But I take a look at some of the other items that we may be able to postpone. I know not everyone is going to agree with me, but I'm going to make those suggestions anyway. The first thing I see in here is replace the fire engine 1032 for $200,000. Now, I'm always in favor of the trust funds. I know I was on the council when we created several of them, and they're just like savings accounts, for the public to understand. Just like savings accounts, if we think there's going to be an expenditure in the future, we try to put money away each year. I know the latest one that I remember that was going to be a big expenditure was the ladder truck, which I guess the projection was around $1.3 million. So we put $250,000 aside for several years. And that was a good thing because now we can pay cash for that.
Whose dog is that?
Mine.
Oh,
But anyway, I see a replacement of 1032 partial funding, $200,000. When will engine 1032, when is the scheduled replacement for that, Richard?
Pat, right now that's scheduled for 2022.
2022, okay. So, again, I'm in favor of saving, for the ladder truck, 1.3 million, obviously. Now, I've been on the council for quite a few years, and I noticed, and I remember that whenever we were replacing an engine or a fire truck, we usually, that's usually around $500,000, $600,000, $700,000. And we usually, in the past, just bonded for that item. So since 1032 doesn't have to replace this year, and I'm looking at a savings of some money, the $200,000 item. I think if we, delayed that this year, my biggest concern is if you listen to reports of unemployed people in the United States, somewhere around 17 million people. I know that's, it's hard to say how many are unemployed here in Oakland, but it's obviously going to affect every state, every town, every county in the United States with 17 million people. So I think we have to look to be as frugal as we can. And you stated that, David, in the very beginning, that, we need to be frugal. And you're absolutely right. And I agree 100%. There are people who don't have money to buy food anymore. It's very, very tight for the unskilled laborers. And I think we have to be frugal for our taxpayers. So looking at that, I'm sure if we did not put that $200,000 in the budget, that would probably help reduce the total cost to the residents. The other item that I'm looking at, and we always pride ourselves on our roads here in Oakland, but I see $1,320,000. I know some roads are in dire needs, obviously, and I respect the opinion of our engineer and our DPW superintendent. But if we could reduce that amount by $200,000, $250,000, again, that would make a substantial impact on our total tax increase for the borough residents. The other item looking at, and just I need an explanation of this. I know the PD energy efficiency improvements, $242,500. Maybe you can give me a little update on that amount. And PD building upgrades, $50,000. So those are my items that, possibly we could discuss and think about. Some of them, reducing the items so it'll be have a greater impact on reducing taxes this year. Because I know this year, our tax, the projected taxes, from talking with Rich, are upwards of 4%, which is like double what we normally do. Normally, it's around 2%. And I know we should try to strive to be around that 2%, according to the guidelines by the state. But anyway, if I could just get input from the rest of the council on that.
Yes.
Those are
Yeah, I
my,
would. Yeah, I have a quick question for Bob, because you're public safety. Bob, you there? Mr. Knapp?
I think he's still offline.
I'll say so. Go ahead. Go
So,
ahead,
well,
Russ.
no, here's my question, Rich. If, Pat's talking about saving about $400,000 off our capital budget, or David. So number one is, what is the dollars and cents net impact to the general public of that if we were to remove that 400,000, what is the public saving this year?
Well, the first
Average-
thing is on two of those line items, the road repair and the efficiency improvements, we're not saving that much money because those are the total costs. What's in this year's budget, because they're going to be either bonding or getting paid by a grant for the efficiency improvements, the budget's only $12,000 for energy efficiency. And we'll get that back over 3 or 4 years in terms of reduced energy costs. On the street and roads, we're only spending $66,000 this year. So you'd have to do a significant dent to the street and road program to bring that down. The net, to answer your question on what it costs the taxpayer, when you're talking about
Average taxpayer,
$100,000 change, it's $20 to the average taxpayer at the end for a full year.
So if we
percentage
basically,
increase?
excuse me, Pat.
I'm
So
sorry.
basically what you're saying is, if we delayed purchasing the replacement fire truck, we're basically, that's about $10, because that's half of that 400,000. Is that roughly correct?
No, the 200,000 would be $40.
Okay, so we're saving $40 to the average taxpayer. The next question becomes, the fire truck, I assume, like everything else in life, gets more expensive every year to replace.
Mhm.
So if we were going to replace that in 2022, and now we're going to replace that in 2024, because it's not really going to be a 1-year delay, we're going to try and stretch that out again next year, because that's what we always try and do.
Yep.
By the time we're ready to buy that truck, it's going to be significantly more expensive than it will be in 2022. And any residual value that we might be able to get for that truck, either as a trade-in or something else, assuming that there is such a thing on fire trucks, we're going to negate that also. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the current state of that truck is, so I don't know how much residual value there would have been. But yes, the cost of trucks are going to go up as you move forward. Your maintenance costs go up as you have
Right.
trucks longer and longer in the system.
And we're looking at a net savings of $40 to the average taxpayer. Bob, since you're back.
I'll speak after Councilman Knapp.
No, I'm
Bob?
here.
Bob, what is the condition of truck 1032?
Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
No.
Okay. I'm sorry, I was muted before. So
Sorry, I don't know how to shut my phone.
just take it off the
Volume.
thing. That's it.
I tried.
So 1032 is an engine up in company 2. The condition of it now is it's not the first due piece going out the door. I think we need to back up a little bit here, because the finance committee discussed exactly what we're discussing now previous to this. And I think it was almost determined that 0% tax increase we did a year or two ago absolutely put us in a bad position now.
Killed us.
Yes,
Killed
I
us.
agree.
Killed us.
Disagree.
It was one of the worst things we ever did. Now we're paying the price.
Agreed.
So with that being said, we had the $200,000 out of the budget this year, and to get us a relatively lower increase for this year, and then we saw what it did for next year, and it skyrocketed the increase. And David and Richard can talk more in detail about that, and I'd like them to. So then we decided. I guess the bottom line is we over the next 2 years we were looking at between a 9 and 10% increase combined. 2 years.
Mhm.
And we were, with that 200,000 out and maybe a couple other incidental things, we were looking at doing I don't remember the exact number, but we'll call it a 2.8, maybe 3% increase this year. And then next year would have been almost 7. So we were like, no way, time out. We have to at least do our best to split that down the middle.
Good decision.
Even
Now,
now,
the other,
Am I allowed? Go ahead, David.
even now, even it out as much as we can. So then by putting that 200,000 back into this year's budget is exactly what that did. It increased us this year a little bit, but it decreased next year's impact significantly.
Thank you, Bob.
David,
next
do you want
year's-
us to answer?
yeah,
Mayor-
just want to add thing for what Bob said about next year's. We're going out to bond this year. So that debt service that we're going to start incurring to pay off some of the large projects we've done in the past is going to have a significant impact on next year's budget. It's a $600,000 increase in the year-over-year debt service budget just for that one line item. So next year's budget does not have a lot of room flexibility in it in terms of trying to manage that increase because we have that really big hit coming at us next year.
Right.
Also, I'd like to say something at this point. It is fiscally irresponsible to go from 0 to 4. And I agree with Lou and I agree with Bobby. If you
Oh,
do
God.
a little bit each, what? I know
Oh,
it's hard for
God.
me to say that. It's very difficult for me to say that. But if you do a little each year, and by the time this budget impacts the residents, hopefully the public health crisis will be just about over or going towards the end. People hopefully will have gotten their stimulus checks. They will be going back to work. We're hoping. So this budget doesn't impact right now. However, what is happening now is as we have all these grace periods and all these delays, such as the mortgage delay, the insurance delay. Now, all of a sudden, people are going back to work and they're going to be hit with 3 months of unpaid bills because they have this wonderful interest-free grace period and they're going to be hit. So if you think it's difficult now, wait till next year when people have to pay all of those debts, all those payments that were extended by the government, and rightly so. And now all of a sudden, they're going to have these lump sum payments. Better we do it a little gradually each time. And as far as the fire truck goes, those fire trucks, if I'm correct, Bobby, what are they, about $1 million?
This one, to replace this one, my guess would be in the 600,000 range.
All right. So could you imagine if all of a sudden one year we have to buy a fire truck for 600,000? God
Well,
forbid, so one of your houses needs a fire truck and this fire truck that we're going to replace is not working properly. You wouldn't want that truck coming to your house.
No, but
Can I
we
just say
bond
something? Can I just say something, please?
them.
And Linda, I understand what you're saying, but that's an alarmist kind of thing. The reality is, it's just not fiscally smart to keep trying to push off something. We have a borough.
I agree with you. I'm agreeing.
Oh, no, I know we're agreeing on the 10,000-foot view. It's just my perception or my take on this is a little different. We've determined we need the truck. You know, this is what our public safety, our fire department has determined that they need in order to protect the borough in a manner that the borough wants to be protected. We have over the years, we have authorized to have this many vehicles. So therefore, it is incumbent on us to be responsible in how we go about replacing these vehicles and to try and take this money away and push this back when, you know, I understand it makes everybody feel good that we're fighting and going, okay, gee, we're going to save $200,000 this year. But the point is, next year, the year after, we're going to have to pay the piper. This is the same thing that happened when we did the no tax increase. Well, all of a sudden we do no tax increase and everybody's patting themselves on the back, you know, until the next year and the year after and the year after come along. And all of a sudden, all that stuff that we didn't do, we still have to do. That year that we had no tax increase, if we had taken a moderate tax increase, then you know what? This year's tax increase would have been less. So I am completely objecting to removing that money for the fire truck. If our fire department says they need it, you know, they need it. It's a truck. It has to be replaced. It's insane to think that you can own equipment and not have to replace it or somehow control its obsolescence.
The only
You
thing,
know-
I'd like to make a point about what, a couple of things. One, what the mayor said, that if we don't appropriate the money this year, we wouldn't be able to buy the engine. That's not true.
No, we just have to do-
No, I
it
didn't
would
say we
delay.
wouldn't be able to buy it. Pat,
Wait a
I didn't
minute.
say we wouldn't be able to buy it. I said, when we have to buy it, it's going to cost us a lot of money, a chunk of money that 1 year. That's what I said.
What's more, Rich or David? I'm
Look,
sorry.
I'm not
I know where
finished.
Pat's going with this. What's more cost efficient? Paying it, doing what we're doing, putting the 200, paying cash for the fire truck essentially, or bonding it over 20 or 30-year bond?
So
Yeah,
that's a great question, Bob. When you go to bond, you're talking interest over 15 to 20 years, depending upon the life. On average, you're probably talking 30% more cost overall. So your $600,000 fire truck over 15 to 20 years paying
780.
interest and debt service is going to be closer to $750,000 or $800,000 in terms of actual out-of-pocket costs. It's also really hard, you know, to make that kind of decision on this annual payment that you're putting aside, because it isn't really a once in a lifetime thing. When you did the DPW building or the library, those are for every 40 years you're going to do that. The fire truck, as we've said already, we did the ladder truck for 6 years at 200. Now we have this engine for the next 3 or 4 years. After that, I believe there's 3 more trucks that are in the pipeline. So this $200,000 investment is one that we're going to make every year forever. It's not a once in a lifetime purchase.
I just have another
Bob,
question.
Bob,
for
can I
Richard.
ask, Bob, can I ask you a
I'm just
question?
asking Richard a question about the surplus. On the fund balance that we did use, have we been able to regenerate that money?
So far we have, and we'll get into
Almost-
that in a little bit further into the presentation
Thank you.
about all of that. If I can just kind of supplement what David
I just want to
said.
ask a quick question, Rich. I'm sorry. Bob, are you still there?
I'm here.
Bob, let me ask, how long is a fire truck good for?
It depends on the truck.
5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years?
No, 20 years. That's why we're on a 20-year replacement schedule. It's the recommendation from the NFPA.
Okay.
20 years. Listen, if we push this engine to 2023 instead of 2022, it's not going to kill us. Everybody needs to remember, we used to have 4 engines, 1 rescue and 1 ladder truck. We now operate with 3 engines. So we took 1 complete engine out of the running. So that was 1 replacement that we did not have to make at one point. So that was a savings down the road, or behind us, I guess now, that we realized. So we do have a spare. We keep our oldest one as a spare. It's not a first due engine. It just basically it helps us, right? In lieu of having, it's a better than nothing type deal.
And
However-
don't we have mutual aid responsibilities to other towns also?
We absolutely do. They come to us, we go to them.
Okay.
All right, Mayor, if I can just kind of supplement, when we put together a series of options for the Finance Committee to consider in light of the COVID-19 crisis, the replacement of the fire truck and that $200,000 funding is one of the items that we flagged for discussion. And, you know, we prepared a schedule and included that in it and showed what that impact would be. And that would take about, 1.5% or so off of the projected increase. And the Finance Committee, after discussing that and what the ramifications would be, specifically decided to leave that in. And to David's point, a lot of what we do, and we talk about this every year, a lot of what we do is to replace equipment on an ongoing basis, whether that's our patrol vehicles, whether it's a pickup truck, or whether it's fire apparatus. Those are, annual recurring charges because it's just fleet maintenance and fleet replenishment. Where you want to, and where it's appropriate to bond, to incur long-term debt, are those projects that, have a 30, 40, 50-year lifespan, your major building projects and the like, that aren't done consistently. And there's a, kind of a philosophy as well to that, where that shouldn't, something with that sort of lifespan shouldn't be borne solely by the taxpayers of today. That should be shared by the taxpayers in the future as well. So it's about coming up with the right mix, looking at all of these different things. Eventually, we've been discussing how do we even do that with our annual road repair program, which, we've traditionally bonded, most towns still do. But really, that's something that we do every single year, and we really need to start going more to as a pay-as-you-go system with road repairs as well, because we have that every single year.
I'm sorry, Richard, what is our fund balance about?
In general fund balance?
Yeah.
David, what did it end the year at? About 4.1?
It ended at around 4.1 something. We've got 1.6 million in the budget, so that brings it back down to 2.6 or so, 2.5, which is, where our surplus plan says it should be. On the high end of our surplus plan for sure, but we do have some other revenue challenges, opportunities, and risks in this year's budget that we'll talk about on the revenue side. So increasing utilization of surplus would be a pretty good sized red flag.
And excuse me, but since we've gone there already talking about our fund balance, and I apologize that I don't know this off the top of my head, what we have an ordinance for fund balance for high and low. Where are we within that right now?
Could you just please explain fund balance? The general public doesn't know what fund balance is.
Sure. Fund balance.
It's the balance of the fund.
Thank you.
Used to be called the surplus.
It's surplus. It's surplus. And Lou, we don't have an ordinance, but it is a policy that is adopted by the governing body at the reorganization meeting every year. And with the 1.6 we're proposing to use, we are within the corridor that is established in that policy. So basically,
and where does the surplus, where does the money come from?
So this, David, we want to get into this now, or Mayor, if you don't mind, if we can wait till we do the revenue part of this presentation.
No, the surplus money. Because you're using fund balance over and over again. Let the public understand what we're talking about.
We have a couple slides coming up on surplus.
Let them get to that part of it first. Why don't we let them get to that part of the presentation?
Right. And if we, just before we jump off of capital, if I can address a couple of the other items that Pat had mentioned. One, the energy efficiency improvements. That is a program that is ultimately meant to save us money. So yes, we're going to spend overall about $240 some odd thousand. The simple payback on that is calculated at between 4 and 5 years on the operating side. So if we do that this year, you'll start seeing some cost avoidance and savings on our utility bills next year. So that's something that's going to pay for itself, in the long run. That's why we're recommending that. And the police department generator, we've talked about ways to, increase our resiliency here, especially after Hurricane Sandy kind of exposed the fact that we had facilities there that were vulnerable. So we've installed a generator here at Borough Hall. The new DPW building has one. We have some portable ones and some things on our water system. The one at Fire Company 1 is due for an upgrade. That's already funded, I believe. You're going to see at next week's council meeting a bid award for the senior center generator, which is backed in large measure with a grant from community development. We had applied for a grant through FEMA for the police department generator. And that the pathway for that grant is it goes to the state OEM. They bundle all the projects and ship them off to the federal government. They decided not to fund or to propose for funding to the feds any generators. So we have this in here because the grant's not going to materialize for that. And the generator currently in the police department is, woefully inadequate for their needs. And that's not something we feel like we can really defer any longer.
I agree.
We have a responsibility to, you know, to the residents, to all of us, because we're all residents in town, you know, to make sure that the infrastructure that we have in place for our police, fire, public works, you know, administration, so it all runs properly, runs efficiently, and can do its job. And I think it's a little irresponsible and dangerous to try and, you know, force our public safety or any part of our borough operation to run at less than their best efficiency. Just my thoughts.
I don't think anybody is saying that should happen.
Pat, we do have three slides on fund balance and surplus utilization in a couple of slides. Is it okay if we move on to those
Sure.
slides and come back to fund balance at that point?
Absolutely.
Mayor, are you okay with that?
Yes, as long as you explain that fund balance is surplus and what surplus is and where the money it comes from that goes into surplus.
Absolutely.
Sure. Rich's bank account.
Oh, okay. All right, Rich, thank you.
Can I ask about the
Sure.
energy? Can I ask about the
Yes.
energy efficiency again?
Sure.
So now we're gonna put money out. You say it's gonna save money down the line. Could we just defer this to next year and then save the money down the line next year?
But it's $12,000.
You could
Oh,
defer it,
yeah,
but
yeah.
you know,
You're right.
that is that we're financing, so the direct budget impact is only 12,000. And you know, a lot of that is going to be offset with the rebates through the
Okay.
direct call program.
Okay.
And that's what we call an investment for the future. So it's a
Yeah,
good-
I was just thinking, you know, I was looking at the total cost and, so anyway, it'll pay for itself, so.
I have a question. David, does the public see the charts we're seeing?
Yes.
Zach? Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so revenue. Again, we look at the impact to the current year and the next 4 budget cycles, and we've already talked about some of the impacts we've considered for next year. We do maintain compliance to our surplus utilization policy that the borough adopts every year. We anticipate energy receipt tax revenue. That's a pretty large item that's certified by the state. And then this year, we also looked at the impact of coronavirus on our miscellaneous revenue streams. We have franchise agreements. They should be okay at contracted levels. Grant awards will confirm all those. But we have variable revenue streams around fees and licenses and permits that are going to be significantly impacted this year. What we did is we anticipated only 2/3 of last year's either realized or anticipated, assuming we were going to lose those revenues for March, April, May, and June. We'll also comply with the tax levy cap requirements. Around the anticipated energy receipt tax revenue, while that's been certified, it is not a guarantee, and we already know that it will be delayed before we do get it if it does come. The state took out homestead rebates for the second quarter of this year. They put a hold on senior and veterans tax rebates as well. At best case, we won't get this revenue until October. So that puts a pretty good strain on our ongoing cash flow, which is why it's a good thing that we do have that surplus sitting there, because we are going to need to use it this year to get through until we get the extra revenues from the state. Anticipated non-tax revenues. This is everything that goes into the budget that is not a tax on the properties. Our surplus, we're actually using more this year than we've ever used in a budget before. That's going up by $90,000. The net of all of our other miscellaneous revenues, that's down by $180,000. I'm excluding grants because there's that offset on the appropriations. But all those other miscellaneous revenues that we had to take down because of coronavirus is $180,000 impact to the budget in terms of the revenue. Tried to offset that a little bit with some surplus. The true actual decline in terms of what we're expecting and have to find funds for elsewhere is that $90,000. So here is the fund balance surplus history. from 2015 to 2016, and again, just so I can recap for Linda and the public, fund balance or surplus, they're interchangeable, is the revenue that you get that is above what you anticipated, either through taxes or fees or miscellaneous revenues. That money at the end of the year rolls it back into our bank account as surplus. On the other side, you have your appropriations, any place where we spend less money than what we anticipated in the budget in 2 years, that rolls into our fund balance. So the fund balance is kind of a gap between what you thought you were going to make on revenue and what you made, and what you thought you were going to spend and what you actually spent. From
Thank you.
2015 and 2016 and even into 2017 a little bit, we built up a pretty good amount of fund balance and surplus. Budgets and some spending things, some retirements and replacements of personnel lags kind of contributed a lot to that. As you can see, for the last 2 years, 2018 and 2019, our fund balance has actually gone down, though slightly, and we anticipate this year going down significantly because of some of the things we've had to do in terms of increasing utilization. So I think we're at the peak of where our fund balance is going to be, and it's going to start coming back down and level out somewhere in the middle of our utilization policy.
David, can I ask you a question, and just maybe you could help me understand?
Yep.
I have heard people refer to fund balance as a byproduct of quote unquote overtaxing. Maybe you could explain, because you've got a lot more financial experience than I do. You can explain to the general public, how fund balance gets used and why it is not overtaxing.
So it could potentially be a result of overtaxing. It's not the case here in the Borough of Oakland. The Borough of Oakland has been managing, if you go back and look at all the budgets that have been driving it, and most of this increase has really come from 2015 into 2017, those years. You had budgeted for certain replacements of personnel that lagged. So if you've got a police officer who retires, they're probably costing municipality between salary and insurance and pension $160,000, $170,000, Rich?
Yeah, that's probably fair
Right.
enough.
So if you don't replace 1 or 2 of those in a given year, and you've had some years where replacements lagged before you can get somebody through the academy, or somebody got into the academy and didn't come back out, then those lags build your fund balance.
But when these guys get older, when these guys get more years in, and they start to get back up to that 170, or with all the contractual obligations for salary increases with the union, we're actually going to be paying them more than 170. We're going to need that money back again.
Yeah, and that's why we look at each year, and we look at what we have to do to manage the salaries. I think it was just fortuitous for those 3 years that you had a lot of those items that didn't come through. You also had some operating things that were put into the budget that also lagged a year or 2 before they actually got completed, due to how long it took to get the bids in place, or how long the projects that were not capital but cash related took. So those 2 things together are what has built your significant fund balance.
So really what you've showed us, as if I understand it, is this is not found money necessarily. This is money that we are going to need. It's just, it may be 2 or 3 years down the road.
There's a lag. You're going to use some of this to offset every year. If you look at 2020, we think our total fund balance is going to go down by the end of this year. If we use the same amount of fund balance next year, eventually that will go away, and you have to pick up utilization or that revenue somewhere else, and most likely that's going to be property tax. So,
and we need to have some fund balance for things that are emergencies. For example, we are certainly going to see a little bit of a COVID-19 fiscal issue. So it's important to have fund balance for, I guess, for these kind of things is what I'm sort of understanding. Any emergency, we get a street collapses and it turns into a big repair. It's not planned for, but we have to be able to do it. And fund balance helps keep us from having to bond it and then pay a high interest rate
Yeah, and especially if you've, got large infrastructure that you support. That's why your surplus policy is such a good one. It keeps you in a range, and it says if you get to the too much money in your bank account,
We give
then
back.
start spending it down. And
Yes.
if you get too low, then in your budget, you're supposed to do things to increase it.
Right. And
Great,
that's a-
great
that's a really-
explanation, guys.
and that's a really important point in terms of what the policy is meant to do, because it is meant to make us manage surplus in a responsible way. So we set out a range from 15 to 20% of basically the in-cap prior year's expenditures, and say, okay, we think that for cash flow purposes and emergency purposes, that is an appropriate amount to use. And I can tell you, based on what other towns do, and talking with people in the field, that is a reasonable range to be in. And the policy states, if it gets too high, we must give it back to the public, right? We have to use that in appropriations, usually one-off appropriations. So you use that to spend, to pay down debt, or to fund a reserve, or to pay for some capital item, and so that you keep it in that range that we think is reasonable.
David or Richard, you mentioned the cost of bonding correct. What is the interest rate that we're being charged for bonding now?
So that's a good question. We're at, I don't recall what the interest rate was for the last bond. The current notes were at 2.25%.
2.25%. Thank you.
A conversation with our bond counsel, and we've already seen it. We were actually 3 months ago looking at really phenomenal rates for our next bond, down by around 1%. That's jumped to 1.86% already. And on a $10 million bond, that's a pretty big chunk of change that we're now going to have to pay in terms of interest as a result of the impact to the economy. I just took a quick look.
Yeah.
Our first
We're about
installment last year from the energy receipts tax was $800,000. That $800,000, if we see it, we're not going to see it until October. So the nice thing about having our surplus, and our surplus will be about 2.6 million at that point, is that we've got the ability to, lean on those savings until we get the revenue.
And Pat, our long-term bond right now, we're at about 3% interest on that.
Thank you.
David,
Any other questions on fund balance?
it's not from Rich's bank account.
It is not. It's not from his,
No,
nor does it
sorry.
go to his.
And during the public portion, I invite anyone who wants to call in to ask any questions of the capital, of the budget, and of fund balance, actually surplus.
So the municipal tax levy, we, the borough, keep just 23% of the taxes that are collected. The remaining goes to support the county library and the school districts. And this has been pretty consistent. I've got a lot of detailed budget information on the last 8 years, and this hasn't changed much. It's been pretty kind of steady where we are in terms of how much of the total taxes that we collect we actually use for municipal operations. And this is the impact
Can
in
you go
terms of
back,
municipal
can you
tax
go
levy.
back one slide? So point out the green shading of the circle.
Yeah, so the local school levy, we turn over about 46% of the taxes we collect to the local school. The yellow triangle is that we do about 20% to the regional school, and
that's
then the county gets
66.
around 10%.
Right. So 66% of the money we collect leaves our hands. So we're
75%
working on
leaves our hands.
30, we're pretty much working on
76.
54%.
76% leaves our hands.
40, oh, so I'm sorry, 20%. You're right, it's in yellow. 40, 50, 60, 76%. So 24% of all the money that's collected stays with us to be used for the other, all the needs.
Yes.
And actually 1% of that goes to the library.
Right.
Mhm.
That's
So
the
the-
third of the mill, right?
Yeah.
The school tax, the local school levy, just so everyone's aware, we, the council, have absolutely no control over. We don't, they vote on their own budget. They could tell us the budget's this, that, or whatever it is every year, and we just have to add that to our collection rate, correct?
That's correct. And
Correct.
at the moment, there has been no relief talked about or planned in terms of any delays of our payments going back out to the school or the county. You know, so at the moment, we still have to make our payment. Rich, we have to pay the school today.
Is this the
Um,
right time to talk
great,
about
David.
property taxes? And that it's coming up on May 1st? Is this the right time?
Now or over the next 10 minutes. We're almost done with the actual presentation slides.
Well, because of, let's keep the slide up,
Mhm.
because I'm getting a lot of questions from residents who are unemployed, who are not receiving paychecks, and the taxes are due May 1st. And so a lot of the residents are asking, why aren't we extending the grace period? And I need you to answer that we've been discussing this and why you're recommending not to.
Well, and maybe if I can, we have to draw a distinction between the due date and the grace period and interest. Okay.
Yes.
There's no statutory authority for us to extend the due date or the grace period beyond the current 10 days that we currently do. Okay. So all we can talk about on our end is the interest part of that. Now, in terms of the grace period, there was legislation that passed the Assembly. I believe the Senate is going to consider it. And that would, in some manner, because I've heard a couple of different versions of this, would in some manner allow for an extension of the grace period. But the School Boards Association, from what I understand, and the Association of Counties have gone on record opposing that legislation because part and parcel with that extension of a grace period would have to be basically allowing towns to delay payments to the schools and county as well.
Is the
And so
county included, Richard? And I haven't read the bill, the legislation.
Yes, they would be included, and both the Association of Counties and the School Boards Association.
No, not the schools, the county, like Bergen County.
When you talk about included, you mean that we would delay paying them? Yes, that
Yes.
would be included in the legislation.
Okay.
What we're hearing is that the prospects for that legislation are very poor. It does not look like it's going to pass and get signed into law.
So if we don't collect taxes, we still have to pay the local school, the regional school, and the county by the due date. So the
Correct.
only flexibility we have without this legislation passing is to reduce the, not the grace period, not to extend the grace period, but we can do is reduce the interest and penalties. That's what you're saying.
Correct. And we provided you with an analysis and a recommendation on that.
And could
That's
you
the
tell us
possibility.
what it is now? Explain what the late payment and the penalties are versus our flexibility.
Sure. David, do you want to get into that a little bit?
Certainly. So currently, we establish this every year at the beginning of the year. Our interest rate on taxes, once it's past the grace period, is 8% an annual on the first 1,500, and then 18% on the next 1,500. So if you're looking at a $3,000 quarterly tax bill, the interest payment on that, if they were
Borough
past
office,
the
Lisa
grace
speaking.
period, would average out to 13%. And that roughs out to about $100 over the quarter if they waited a quarter to pay.
So it's 8% of the first 1,500 for that
Right.
quarter.
Yep,
And what is the second 1,500?
18% for anything above that.
So then what if it is a, I don't know, what if it's a $3,500 quarterly tax?
On a 3,000 makes the math easy. That would be $101 in terms of the interest penalty for the quarter.
So the 15, so the first 1,500 late fee is 8%.
Yep.
And the second 1,500 is 18%. But what about if it was a 2,000? Let's say it's a total of 3,500 quarterly tax bill.
Yeah, so if it was 2,000, then, you're probably talking
It's 18% of the full, of the
18% on the 2,000 annual. So that
Right, so
would put
it's-
that interest penalty up to around $130.
So just to be clear, the first 1,500 is an 8%
Mhm.
penalty. And the second 1,500 plus, not just 1,500,
Right.
but
Anything above
whatever the
1,500.
1,500 plus is 18%. So
Yes.
the only thing we have the flexibility to do as local government is to reduce the interest.
Yes, we had that discussion with both our auditor, both of our associations, both the finance associations and the municipal managers associations, and we talked to bond counsel about doing just that. If we were to take it down significantly, take it down to zero, let's say that's the biggest benefit that we could potentially give anybody who's struggling to pay. Again, that would save them that $130, for the quarter until they had to get that payment in. But we would have risk on the revenue side where we would likely have to take out tax anticipation notes because we, at the moment, still have to pay the county and the schools on time. Tax anticipation notes, bond counsel said right now the rates are up. It's going to cost us $25,000 to $35,000 per month in terms of the interest to those notes. It also has a long-term impact to our bond rating. If we take out tax anticipation notes, our bond rating will go down from where it is at our AA, and we would then incur higher interest rates when we go out to bond this year.
What
So
is
there
the
are
due date?
risks.
What is the due date? I mean, our due date is May 1st. What is the due date we pay schools, local, regional, and the county?
I have to pay them today, and I have to pay them this date every month. So it's a monthly that I pay the schools, and it's quarterly that I pay the county.
So when is the county due?
County is due May 15th.
15th.
Yep.
Got it. Excuse me.
Hey, while she's away, can I just say something? I got to tell you that I've been through this budget process a few years now. And Rich, David, Bobby, and Russ, phenomenal job on doing this budget. And I'm very, very pleased with what you guys have done here, how it's being presented. And so far, the decision-making seems to be spot on. I'm going to give myself a pat on the back because I put Bob and Russ on the finance committee as council president. So I guess I get something here. But you guys, seriously, you guys are doing a great job. And this is an excellent presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Lou.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Lou. The one thing we all need to remember is what we're doing today, we need to do at the next council meeting.
Sorry.
I know Linda has us, or David and Rich, being very detailed, which is good, but I think there's limited amount of people watching right now because it's 10 o'clock in the afternoon or in the morning
Morning.
versus the actual council meeting. So just keep that in mind that we need to, I don't know if we have to be as in-depth next Wednesday, but we have to be pretty detailed and all the explanations and the surplus or the fund balance, how that, everything you're doing now, we have to redo Wednesday night.
Well, we could
Can
just
we put
replay
some
it.
of these charts on our website,
Sure.
Yeah.
David?
Yeah.
With Michael, especially like the municipal tax levy, the pie shape, so people understand and talk about the deadlines that we have to pay the school 46% of every dollar we collect, the regional and the county. And the date. So if we don't have, we pay the, just to be clear, because I had to walk out for a minute, I'm sorry. We pay the schools monthly.
Yes, we do.
Yeah,
That's both local and regional.
Yep.
Yep.
And we have to pay the county, the quarterly county on the 15th of May.
Yes.
So we really have some flexibility for 15 days.
Yeah. So certainly this governing body has made sure that the borough is in very, very good fiscal shape. So we could push a little bit. We've got flexibility reserves that would help us, so yes, you could push through the end of May, if the state would allow us that kind of grace period, and it would probably be okay. There'd be some tight points, but we would manage through that.
Do we have a grace period with the schools and the county right now?
No,
No?
The schools actually are pretty flexible with us. They've always had us have lower payments in July and August because they know we haven't put out our new tax bills, so we're not collecting as much money. So they actually lower our bills for July and August, then they go back up to a little bit higher than average for September through December. So the schools already are doing what they can to help us with our budget cycles as they go up and down.
And the
right,
county?
right,
The county, no,
statutorily,
the county
though,
gets upset if we don't pay them on time.
Oh,
yeah, and the schools are very good to deal with. My point was, statutorily, we don't get a grace period the way residents get a grace period.
Right.
got it.
Hey, wait a minute. If we don't write a check to the school, what are they gonna do? Send two guys out after us? We just don't pay it. Just saying.
Just saying. So the municipal tax levy that we've been talking about and focused on and trying to do everything we can to impact does have a significant impact this year on the average assessed home. And the average assessed home currently is $413,000 and change. There will be an increase from this year to next year of $123.
Where do you get the average assessed home number?
That number comes from the total number of properties that are considered residential divided by the total assessment. It comes right off our tax duplicate
Okay,
from the tax assessor's office.
From the tax assessor.
Now you can see in the chart that our impact to the budget year over year is always the smallest. We're the smallest piece. And even this year, with as much as we having to put in this year's budget, it is still the smallest piece of the budget. If you look at the 10-year average, even including this large increase, our average will still be below or about 1.76% and roughly at around $50 per year. I think everybody else, the non-municipal, has gone up by about 2.1% a year over the last 10 years. Here you can see in terms of a trend chart what we've been able to do as a municipality and where we've kept the budget. And yes, this year it is a jump, but even with that jump, it is still in pretty good shape and better than what everybody else has done.
so you're saying on an average home of 413,000, what is the increase?
The increase for this year would be $123 over last year.
And
Overlay. Okay, on a
and that-
$413,000 home.
Yes.
And that includes about $9.50 for the library.
Yes.
And it already includes the library.
That
Yes.
includes the library, yeah. Without the library, we're at $114 on the.
But it doesn't include the county because we don't know what that's going to be.
And it doesn't
We-
include the schools.
We
Correct.
assume the counties and the schools will both come in at around their 2% targets. There's usually some exceptions occasionally that cause them to go higher and lower. But when you look at the last 10 years, they've ranged between 1.9 and 2.15% every year. So they're pretty easy to project in terms of what they'll be every year. They're really consistent.
So if you take that, I don't know if you projected it, but if you take that increase for those two and add it to the increase for the municipal increase, do you have any idea what the total increase would be for a house of $413,000?
Yes, that's the gray line in the chart. On average, over the past 10 years, it's been about $220 per year. This year, it'll be about $340
Per household.
per
Thank you.
house.
Now, this is where it says that 4.25%. When we took the fire truck out, that went down to, what was it, like 2.8, David?
Yeah, like 2.75.
2.75, and the math really does work out almost exactly. If you take $100,000 out of the budget, it's around $20.56 to the average resident on that full year. So if you took out that $200,000, it would bring this year's increase down to, 83.45.
Right, and then that's when we looked at 2021, that was showing in the 7+% range.
That's correct.
And
Which
what's,
is why it was a smart idea to put the engine back in this year to balance
Absolutely.
this year and next year.
Absolutely.
and what is the tax, one tax point is equal to how much money about?
About generates a little over $200,000.
So one tax point's a little over 200,000.
Yeah.
Correct. Thank you.
So that's the end of the current fund overview. The utility budgets, for the most part, we'll go over them real quickly. We did a lot of that work in the fall when we looked at the rates for 2020. The water utility budget, revenues and appropriations are both up about 2.6%. We did do a 2% increase on the variable rate, and the base rate also went up to $49 from where it was previously per quarter.
Right,
Could
and
you
if you'll
remind everybody who's listening that the quarterly water bills are not issued the same for everybody?
That's correct, Mayor. The quarterly bills come out over 6 cycles during the quarter. That allows us to manage sending the bills out and collecting that money and doing all the meter reads.
Thank you.
So there are 6 different cycles of water bills that go out during a quarter.
Is there any way to tell if there's anyone from the public on this right now?
I see some people.
Yes, participants.
I see names.
You do, okay. I just want to make
If you
sure.
click on participants,
I don't have participants, but okay.
You don't see names?
Oh, I do down below. Yes, I'm
So
sorry.
the major increase in terms of the water utility budget is on the rent side, because we did increase the quarterly charge. The reason for that is on the capital output side. On the other end, the New Jersey Water Quality Act has required us to do significantly more work in terms of infrastructure maintenance and infrastructure testing. I think it was last year that Anthony had to start sending people out to testing all the valves over a certain period of time. So that's a pretty big labor chunk that he's got to be able to manage.
Right, and if you recall, there's a schedule that we need to develop for the replacement of water main, kind of doing the same thing as we do with road repairs. So, over the next 3-4 budget cycles, we'll be building that into the budget, and that first phase of that was built into the 2020 budget.
Any questions on water?
Next.
Sewer, our budget is down by around 10%. We implemented our annual 2% increase on the variable rate. We had one-time costs in 2019 that we didn't incur in 2020 with the operator change and some other stuff that's going on with things we have to straighten out with the state. So the budget kind of popped up to a peak in 2019, came back down this year, and should start to level out for us.
Pat, do you have a question?
Who, me?
Oh, because I saw the green around your box.
No.
He was breathing heavy.
Oh,
Well, this doesn't do it for me.
Okay, then that is the end of the 2020 budget presentation.
so
Once again, guys, great job. Budget committee did fantastic job on this.
I
thank
love
you.
the graphs. I mean, it's easy to see and understand. Thank you, David.
Yeah, Dave's a big graph guy. He likes little wheels and colors.
And colors, very nice. So
I
now
like pictures.
can we open, what do we do now? Do we open to the public, or does anybody want to add something before we open to the public?
let me just say thank you to Rich and to David for all the work they did. I mean, really, they went through the budget twice. They had the budget prepared, and then we were hit with this. We were blindsided by COVID, and then they went through it again, and I just want to thank you for all the hard work that they did.
Yeah,
Amen.
great point. Rick.
I second that motion.
Thank you, and thank you for your patience while we kind of went back to the drawing board on all of this. And I really want to thank all of the department heads as well. As you saw from the first slide, they talk about the budget as a cycle, a year-long cycle. And when we started budget planning back in the fall, nobody would have predicted what has occurred. And again, I think the department heads really do a very good job here in asking for what they think they need, legitimately need to operate their departments. And that's been over a series of years where I think we've gotten to the point where they know what my expectations are, and I trust them when they say that they, when they have a request in, that it's going to be something that's legitimate. So kudos to them as well. Just before we open to the public, so we'll prepare this maybe a little bit scaled down from this for next week's meeting, but essentially imparting the same information. You will be getting a formal budget document from my office. It's not going to be, given the circumstances right now, it's not going to be the full binder that you're used to, but it will go into some detail on the actual changes in appropriation levels, department by department, as part of kind of an expanded executive summary. And of course, if anybody wants anything as we go through this in terms of historical detail, the admin sheets that you normally see, things like that, we'd be happy to provide all of that. Also, we of course wanted to have this meeting before we move to introduction because we need your feedback on how to prepare the budget for introduction. But this does not necessarily begin and end the debate. You certainly have the opportunity, if you want to, after we introduce, to continue discussing anything about the budget that you wish. And so if we introduce next week, the public hearing and final adoption would be scheduled for the second meeting in May. Okay.
Thank you, everybody who participated and did all the work on this budget. I know it takes a lot of time. The professionalism is always outstanding. David, Richard did a great job preparing for us. And I commend the people on the budget committee for all the time they had to put in on this particular budget, which probably was twice as much work. But thank you.
I just want to agree with Pat, what he said. It was very comprehensive, easy to understand, and hopefully our residents understand where their tax bill comes from and how it's developed. It's not all municipal, just remember that. We're actually a small portion of your total tax bill, but it is what it is, and we do our best to try to put together something that fits inside the pocketbooks of everybody, and can and still not lose any of the services that you receive on a daily basis. So thanks to the Finance Committee, thanks to Dave, thanks to Rich, and hopefully we'll get this passed and start moving on, and more hopefully that we get past our present situation with the virus and everyone gets back to whatever normal will be in the future.
Thank you. And I mean, these graphs and charts were wonderful and very easy to understand, and your explanations were terrific. So thank you. So at this time, I'll entertain a motion to open to the public.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Now,
Okay,
if
so
you're
may-
listening,
Yeah, if any member of the public wishes to speak, they have to raise their hand and Michael will unmute them.
How do they raise their hand on the computer?
There's
Yeah.
actually a button.
There's a button, I think.
There's a prompt.
oh, there's a hand button?
Yes.
I don't have one.
Yeah, you do. It's on the bottom. Hit participants.
Somebody raise their hand?
Listen, I finally
No
got
one,
this thing.
Michael
working.
said no one raised their hand, so
Motion to close.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So at this time, a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And meeting is adjourned. The next meeting, which is our council meeting, is next week, next Wednesday night. We're back here on Zoom. So thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
Have a great day and be safe.
Take care,
Be
everyone.
safe, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
So now we close. Is that what we do?
Yes.
Leave meeting.
Leave meeting.